In central Pennsylvania, meantime, the commander-in-chief probably would have rather faced more flying shoes than any fact-checking of the garbage he continued to send flying, his own version of recent history. No fear of fact-checking, of course, from a compliant audience during a Bush legacy tour stop at the U.S. Army War College. No one else was absent during today's speech. Humility. Specifically, President Bush emphasized his record on national security, but only since the 9/11 attacks.
Well, there's room for honest and healthy debate about the decisions I've made. And there's plenty of debate. There can be no debate about the results in keeping America safe. We'll never know how many lives have been saved, but this is for certain. Since 9/11, there's not been another terrorist attack on American soil.
Let's turn now to our own Richard Wolff, senior White House correspondent for Newsweek magazine. Richard, good evening.
Good evening, Keith.
Now, let me start with this fundamental disconnect there. How on earth can any rational human claim credit for an absence of terror attacks since 9/11 without ever acknowledging any responsibility for the utter failure to prevent the attacks on 9/11?
Well, that's a very good question, and I'm not sure how to define rationality after 8 years of this president. But let's cut him some slack here and say that 9/11. Yes, they were warned. The Presidential Daily Brief. There were obviously people tracking various pieces of the 9/11 group itself. But say he couldn't do anything about that for various reasons. What is the rational discussion now about the kinds of attacks we've seen? The definition that there hasn't been attack is just confined to American soil. Ask the people in London or Madrid or Bali or any of the numbers of people in Iraq whether there has been less terrorism or more terrorism since 9/11, whether President Bush's policies, and he spelled out in some detail about his own record. For instance, he said that he'd taken a reasonable route. There was a defensive position and an aggressive position, and he'd taken some third track. I don't know how that's a rational analysis at all. So I'm prepared to give him some leeway in that first year, but not for everything that followed.
And there was also the unfortunate setup to what he said today. I mean, if we did not get what was the intended point today, Dana Perino had said at her podium yesterday that keeping America safe since that tragic day did not happen by accident. And this is the other thing that seems to be a disconnect, because there is there not, I mean, a body of evidence suggesting that in terms of domestic attacks, and as you just pointed out, what about Americans who were in Mumbai or lower London or anywhere else? But in terms of here, to some degree, this has been, if not, you wouldn't want to use the term accident, but you could say inadvertent almost.
Well, obviously, everyone's grateful that there hasn't been another terrorist attack on American soil. But to quote the great philosopher of the Bush era, Donald Rumsfeld, when he was mapping out the various stages of human knowledge, this is a known unknown. We don't know why there hasn't been an attack here. It may have been that the capabilities were exaggerated of al-Qaeda's reach over here. But what we do know, in a sense, is that the core leadership of al-Qaeda is still there. Would people feel safer if Ayman al-Zawahiri and Osama bin Laden were killed or imprisoned? I'm sure they would. And the question is, what kind of other terrorism have we seen? What other recruitment have we seen as a result of Bush's policies throughout the world? You can define it very narrowly and just say, well, America seems to be better off now. But the world, according to the intelligence community's analysis, most definitely is not.
Well, and to even the degree that the president acknowledged a small corner of that world, does that statement sort of sum up this entire tour? His two-word answer to the Martha Raddatz question about al-Qaeda not having existed in Iraq before the invasion, he answered by saying, "So what?"
Yeah, well, he may as well have used Rumsfeld's line, which is stuff happens. I mean, it's bizarre to say that he's been fighting terrorists everywhere. There just seem to be more and more of them all the time. And then there's the collateral damage of the very aggressive tactics that he's taken. Fine if you want to define it as being on the offense, but don't pretend that there's a third way here that involves liberty and democracy, because actually we have seen the spike in terrorism.
Richard Wolff of Newsweek and MSNBC. As always, Richard, great thanks. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Keith.